Hello and welcome everyone. MediaNet Berlin-Brandenburg welcomes you to Esports Experts Forecast, a look at the present and future of the esports industry. My name's Graham Ashton. I'm Esports International Relations Manager for Riot Games. Thanks very much for joining us today. Thank you to MediaNet's partners for their support, and of course, thanks very much to my guests for joining me. To my right, we have Marie Mejerwall, who has a long history in esports as a caster, a commentator, an organizer, but also in game development as well. Thanks very much for joining me.
Right, well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk a little bit more about the esport and the future of it today.
Next to her, we have Dorian Gorr, who is CMO and co-founder of VERITAS Entertainment, the company behind the LVL Esports Center in Berlin, which some of our viewers may be familiar with. Thanks for joining us, Dorian.
Thank you. Always happy to be here, and always happy to talk to Graham. Really cool to be here. Excited. It will be a cool talk.
And then joining us remotely from Zagreb is Nikola Stolnik, the CEO and founder of Good Game, a company that creates competitions for B2B esports competitions, as well as working with brands and influencers, and probably a lot more else he'll tell us about. Thanks for joining us, Nikola.
Thank you guys for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here.
Even remotely. So before we get started into the discussion, I just want to thank Third Nature Studios for welcoming us as guests this evening. As you may have noticed, this is a digital studio, so it's often used for like panel conferences such as this, but it can also be used for webinars and presentations. And the fun part is that you don't have to use the same background every time, so you can change the scenery a little bit, try something a little bit different. So maybe we can have an example. Yeah, I know. Probably a setting where
Oh my God, we're in office now.
A setting we're probably a little less familiar with in recent times.
My hair is disappearing in this one.
Yeah. But if this is a bit too formal, they could also transport us to somewhere completely different, something a bit more out in the wilderness, like I don't know, a jungle, perhaps.
Put us in a jungle. Please do.
Yeah.
This is like, you know, when you're trying out the teams or like all the Zoom filters, you know. Yeah. Suddenly you're in space.
Nicola, I feel kind of missing out here.
Yeah,
the
like
first esports conference out of a jungle.
Should we be scared?
Well, it happened one day, like for real. But yeah, we could also do something maybe a bit more close to them, something a bit more futuristic, more in tone with esports setting, like kind of like a spaceship kind of thing. I don't know if they have that.
Oh, I like
they do.
Spaceship.
Hey, there you go.
Spaceship is also really cool.
Yeah.
I like the spaceship. It's my favorite so far.
Okay. Well, we're going to stick with our kind of go-to background pre-prepared, and I think we'll just get started into discussion if you guys are.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
So, and we'll start off with you, Marie. If you could just give us a little bit of. You've been in esports for a long time,
yeah.
So I was wondering if you could just talk us through some of the many different hats you've worn, both in esports and in game development as well.
So I started playing Counter-Strike in 2001, kind of registering my clan, and that was 20 years ago, and it was the start of something big. In 2003, I joined Femina Gaming, later brand Femina United, and we had the world's biggest community for female gamers, and we also hosted tournaments in Counter-Strike, Counter-Strike 1.3 to 1.6 at DreamHack 2 times per year, and we had an online ladder and an online league. And a lot of the kind of top female talent that you see in the kind of FPS space today were actually our players at the time. But then it was kind of, at 2010, the industry was not yet ready for me to get a full-time job in esports, so I went into game development, meanwhile doing esports on the side. So meanwhile, you know, I was rising the ranks as programmer, designer, lead designer, game director. I was also being a caster. I was really good at casting, so I became an analyst. I became very appreciated community from my analyst, so I became a coach. And I also had a YouTube show for a little while, so I've been an admin for a little while, so quite a couple of hats. And even so, like, back in the days when I was hosting tournaments, you did everything. You know, like one person would do like, let's find partners, let's find sponsors, let's recruit a team, let's make sure we get computers down here, let's have a sign-up page for all the teams, let's like be head admin, let's have like the prize ceremony, you know, and all of it. So now I'm actually also returning to that. So I had my last day as game developer on Friday, and now I'm actually looking to relaunch Femina United and kind of rebuild the female esports space from the ground up.
Oh, well, congrats for taking the plunge. The industry welcomes you back.
Thank you.
Dorian, so your background was as a journalist, but now with VERITAS, you're essentially building these kind of multi-purpose esports centers. Could you talk us a little bit about what is the value that VERITAS and the Level centers are bringing to esports, and what kind of gap you're trying to fill?
So Level is, I call it an experience brand, right? So what we do is we build the best gaming venues on planet Earth. The first one is located not far from here, right, at Checkpoint Charlie in Berlin. where we, under one roof, offer everything you could possibly dream of as a gamer, from a professional stage to team training rooms to full gastronomy services to a production studio to pretty much anything, from VR to high-end gaming PCs and a public viewing cinema. And what we do is, and there also comes my background as a journalist into play, is in the end it's really about content, right? I do believe that you only build strong community through the power of great content, and I treat Level as a walk-in production studio, and it's optimized fully for content creation. So everything that happens there is supposed to be turned into content that is then spread out across TikTok, Twitch, you name it, right? All digital platforms. And this is how we build a global community under the brand name Level, written LVL. And we've seen slightly a lot of growth in the past year, despite a pandemic that I think we will talk about. And now we have our streamer network also signed up with more than 8 million followers who carry out the brand on a daily basis all across Twitch pretty much.
Excellent.
I can also vouch actually for Dorian.
Yeah, she had a party at our place.
We were very well taken care of. They also have a VIP lounge, and they also have, I've seen their top tier, top class production studio with the best broadband internet I think the building can offer. And they even have a AR Mario Kart track that you can kind of put on. You can just it's like a radio kart with a little Mario Kart, physical, and they built up the whole track inside the space. And you can drive around, and there's a camera, and you can see yourself from the car, filming yourself when you're playing it.
Here's your check, thank you. Obviously what we did a lot, and that's where I didn't know that you're out of Meta Games, by the way. So sad to hear that.
Well, as of Friday.
But Meta Games had their company party at our place pretty much, and this is also something that we do, obviously.
We haven't even talked about the burger bar yet. But
we haven't even talked about. We have a burger restaurant there with a robot arm that does the burger, and now I'm finished. Heading it over to remote. I'm sorry.
So Nikola, obviously Good Game is a competition organizer, but it's serving a very specific space within the esports market. Can you talk us a bit about the formation of that and what value it's providing within esports?
Sure. So our story is kind of unique because we started as an off-brand, as a hobby. Back in the day, I was working for Google in Dublin, and as the weather there isn't too good, you would basically have the option of either going to a pub or playing video games with your friends. We opted in for the second one, and soon enough, people from other tech companies followed, and we then had these tournaments in between companies. And this sparked an idea when I moved back to Croatia to be a CMO of a game dev company, to gather tech companies and give them the opportunity to compete in CSGO. This was sort of a hobby, and it grew quickly throughout the first 2 years. And this was basically a question: should I pursue this full time or just leave it be, because it took so much of my time? We started the company in 2018 and quickly then developed other avenues as well, meaning content production, influencer marketing, league and tournament management. We also had our own esports teams, so it grew very quickly and rapidly.
All right. Excellent. Thanks very much for that. Just before we kind of get into the main topics, just a reminder that if you have questions that you want to submit, you can do so whether you're watching through Twitch or YouTube, and we'll take care of those at the end. So the first kind of topic of discussion is looking at the kind of the trajectory of esports, right? Competitive gaming is as old as gaming is, right? Games have always been competitive, and even though maybe the kind of fabric of what esports is started with games like Quake and Counter-Strike back in the early 2000s, and has kind of built a continuity up till now, it's only really in the last maybe 5-10 years that the industry has taken the shape that it has, in the sense that you can now have people that make a living as players or as team members or as casters and analysts. Not to mention the fact that if you say the word esports to people, they know what you're talking about in most cases. I want to ask all three of you for your own thoughts on, if you drill down deep into it, what is driving the trajectory of esports? What's kind of powering this high growth?
So I can start. My opinion is that it used to be a bubble, but the more we've gone, and the more companies started getting into it, the more brands started getting into it, the more it's become more just accepted. Once the prize pool came up for the international Dota, for example, became a big thing. Someone put a clip out there well, you can earn this much money playing Fortnite. You stop playing football, stop playing Fortnite. So it is more accepted in society, and also parents understand that you can actually make a career out of this. You're not just wasting your life. That's the one thing. But the other thing is that game developers are realizing that, hey, if we can have a game that is alive and have a game as a service, then we can make a whole lot of more money and keep our game alive for a longer time.
I also believe that a lot of it has to do with a generation following for which it's totally normal to watch others play games, right? Because like when you were growing up, the games have always been there, right? So I'm 35, right? When I was growing up with video games, you know, in the 90s and early 2000s, back then, everybody played in our age group. We all played video games, but not many made the move to watching others play, right? And obviously, in terms of making an esports into something that is a successful mass phenomenon, right? You need spectators, you need people who want to watch it and be entertained by it. And still, in my generation, so the mid-30s people, even among people who passionately play video games, I very often encountered that when I tell them about what I do for a living, right? Why would you watch somebody else play video games? I could just play instead, right? And now there's the whole generation, and this has been, you know, bubbling to the surface over the past 5 to 10 years, for whom it's totally normal that, yeah, of course, they grew up watching YouTubers. So they grew up and all of a sudden there's not this stigma anymore. It was the most natural thing for them to watch it, just like it's to watch sports, right? And I think with this, obviously, the audience came. The moment that the audience is there, the brands come in. Through the brands, the money comes in. And all of a sudden, you know, we have a nice industry forming itself.
Nikola, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it's sort of a sexy new concept where you cannot really pinpoint to maybe the older generation what the actual value is. And in that sense, when the message is kind of, you know, digital and everything is very flashy and you see these huge numbers coming up either through viewership or prize money or whatever else, people are starting to jump on board in the recent years. And I would completely agree. We see a huge uptick in the number of brands and sponsors and partners who want to enter the space just because it's something new and flashy. I read a quote from Sequoia, the huge investor firm, that esports is now currently at the state where NFL was in the 70s of the past century. So if you compare and you see market trajectories, you can see that this is an upward trend, which is pushing esports to be one of the forefronts of entertainment of the future. And in that sense, you know, it's fully natural that people and viewers and brands and players are jumping on the train, and it's just going forward.
I think it's really important, though, especially as we welcome, you know, more brands and more kind of entities into the space, more partners to work with, that we help make sure that it's clear what it is they're buying into. So if you could just answer the question, like, what is something that you want to make very clear that esports is not?
The solution to all your problems. No, I mean, kidding aside, but there's some truth to that because, you know, like with the new economy, like when the internet, like .com and all these bubbles, right? Obviously, there is a danger that there are parts of it that are a bubble, right? And I'm not talking about like the overall phenomenon. This is a long-term cultural change that we are seeing, 100%, right? But as with all things that experience some form of a hype and money throwing in, there's also like lots of opportunities that are, you know, something you shouldn't pursue, right? And meaning if brands enter the space without having a good product, without having a smart vision of what they want to get out of this, right? Then it's very tough to just, you know, place this onto esports, like speaking about an NFL analogy, throwing a Hail Mary and being like, yeah, we'll be fine, right? Now we do esports, so now we have the attention of the young target group. It won't be like this, right? So you have to still have some form of a strategy. And oftentimes I did encounter this also because it was sold to brands like this, that it was treated like, hey, this is now your one-stop solution. Now all your problems with attracting a young target audience for your product will be gone because you do esports now. That's obviously not the case. It's a long process to build something up in that space, right? And it needs a strategy.
And I think Red Bull is a good kind of prime example of someone who did that right. Because Red Bull came in even like early as 2012, maybe even before that, and they'd be like, hey, we're going to sponsor our own tournaments, you know, like, hey, we're going to put a lot of money in it. And also their product energies go pretty well with esports and gaming, so that's a natural fit. So if companies can kind of find a way to align and synergize and harmonize with the industry, then they can have a really good time. But if they're trying to, you know, throw money for the sake of throwing money, then they better take some care about it.
Yeah, we do a lot of education for brands and agencies in the region and in the CEE, just because we want them to understand better of what esports is and what it can provide as a value. And for the question of what esports isn't, I would very clearly state that esports isn't game development. Because at first, when people try to enter esports, they are imagining this huge number of $180 billion of market value, where esports in itself, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's closer to 1.5 or 2 billion. So, people get this huge number in their head, they get millions of players, and potentially they think of them as viewers. Yes, in some sense, of course, it does make sense to connect the two, but I think you should definitely clearly separate game development and esports when talking to brands.
Even though I think that it's actually, and Marie pointed towards this, right, that it's become more of something that game developers look out for. I think we have a lot of consensus here, by the way, that we all started with Counter-Strike, potentially with the exception of Graham, to be honest. But obviously I started too with Counter-Strike, but this was a mod and it was competitive, but nobody developed it with the eye for, and this will fill stadiums and people will want to watch that, right? Nobody did this, it was just a fun mode. And now obviously all brand or all game developers to some extent have to think about this. Is this potentially something that is enjoyable to watch? Can we integrate some features like inclined leagues or leaderboards or party features and communication tools? Like all these kind of things, I do believe have a lot of are still close to game development in that sense. The question remains though, can you actually control making a game into a successful esports? And to my knowledge or from my experience, you can't really. You can try, but in the end, the viewer, the player decides, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's the two parts of it. You can make your game esport ready to make sure it has the potential to be esport. Like you have a voice chat, there's a profanity filter out there, there's a really good matchmaking and ranking system, and like the central Discord for finding a game and a team and that kind of stuff. You start some tournaments, you can do all that, but you also kind of just because you build it doesn't mean that they will come, because they have alternatives today. So what do you provide? Especially if you're in a genre like the FPS genre, the strategy genre, what are you doing that is better than the games that already existed, that are established? Why should a gamer who's like, I have all my friends, my high ranking in this game, why would I go to your game? And sometimes we do see that. And we see also, for example, in StarCraft, we had a lot of people who were not very successful when a new kind of patch came. And they were like, oh, look, Heroes of the Storm, I'll slide in here. Or oh, Hearthstone, oh, I can slide in here. So you will have some sort of early adopters, but you need to ride on that wave, and you're probably going to have to pay for paid influencers as well to get going. And then it's all about keeping that momentum and make sure you have enough skill challenges in your game for people to be entertained.
Mm-hmm. And I think one example for games that were ready but didn't really make it out of the more recent past, Diabotical, right? We all crave a new fast-paced FPS Quake kind of game that can, be the next, or revive that kind of genre for esports. Totally ready. Last I checked, nobody's really watching that, and I'm not sure if anybody's playing that either. Don't want to do injustice to the game development, because the game's actually kind of good, but in the end the consumer decides, right? But you have to be ready.
This is kind of the challenge of the space, right? Is really understanding what the esports fan wants and how you can direct them, because because they're maybe perhaps slightly younger and obviously digitally driven. They can be a bit more unpredictable. This is an industry that grew online, and the content is predominantly consumed online. So in that sense, let's kind of dive a bit deeper into this target audience that brands are so interested in. What makes the esports target audience so unique and so worth having?
From my kind of view, there's two things really. One of them is that they have, they're almost born with a smartphone, and they have instant access to whatever entertainment they are interested in, whether it's a Twitch channel, whether it's, read what's happening on Twitter, whether it's Netflix, whatever. They can, they're not like us. We have to see whatever is on TV. There's 5 channels, that's it. You better suck it up. They can tailor and consume, hey, I want to only watch this game and these streamers. That's the first thing. And number two is it's the engagement, you know? Like back in the days, we were more passive watching different things, but now esports is interactive. You can be engaged, you can get a jersey, you can write a chat, you can get into the Twitter discussions. So it's like a whole much more richer kind of fan experience to dive into.
I just come out of a workshop that I've been giving to some investors and people who are looking into this, right? And one of the main reasons when I always tell people why gaming audience overall, but the esports audience specifically, is so interesting, because they are passionate and they like to spend money on things, and they like to spend money, or are already educated or conditioned to spend money on digital things, right? If we like just look at it from a business perspective, you know, coming from the traditional media industry, as do you, Graham, right? Journalism has a big problem in the sense of they can't bring it's really tough uphill battle for them to get people to pay for digital content, digital items, whatever it is. The gaming industry has like cracked that nut like this. It's easy, right? We condition. We don't buy our games in boxes anymore, right? We buy everything digitally. We buy in-game cosmetics. We buy DLCs that are simply digitally. And I think also for the brands that enter the space, this is what, if you want to, you need to have a product then for them, right? But this is what makes it so interesting, right? There's massive revenue opportunities because of that, I believe. And not many people, I think, approach it from that angle, but I think that's why the target group it's one of the many reasons why it is so attractive.
Go ahead, Nikola.
So from our research, we found that esports fans are extremely loyal to brands who support esports, because it's such a it's such a niche thing, and for the brand to recognize it and to appreciate the fans of something which is not mainstream, I think the fans give back more than the actual brands put in. That's one thing. The other thing is that these fans, as you already said, are highly educated in terms of interactive fun and digital goods, and they also have purchasing power, and they are well equipped to use all the inventory which is put in front of them through streams or live events or whatever else is in tune with esports. Yeah.
To that very good point from Nikola, by the way, like the brand loyalty, and that is something where I'm very interested to see how, if it will remain like this, or if at one point it's just natural that brands have done something in there, then it's not, for the fan, not that noteworthy anymore. But right now, and still for the foreseeable future, we are at a point where the fan rewards the brand for being authentically integrated in that space and taking this whole community seriously, right? And my favorite example that I often use is, like, if you've ever seen that clip from the ESL One in Birmingham, and there's a whole stadium shouting DHL, DHL. Have you ever seen like football stadium where like, hey, this corner is presented by whatever like beer brand, and the fan reacts? They don't, right? Because they don't care anymore. But like when these big non-endemic brands specifically enter esports, right, it's still noteworthy to agree that the fan is like, this is cool, right? Especially when the integration is great. Like, obviously they did a great job with having the guy who brings out in the DHL, I wouldn't want to call it a costume, what is it, the uniform, right? Brings out like goodies out of like a DHL package, and the fans rewarded this, right? And this is obviously something, if we show this to anybody who sponsors traditional sports, where they'll be like, I think they will be in disbelief. This is not something that they know, right? Because they count on something like, oh yeah, we do subtle messages, and in the end it will somehow pan out that they will buy our product. It's all about awareness, blah, 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 right? And this is very different. I'm just very curious, and happy, Nikola, also because you brought it up to your point of this, like, but I'm very curious to see if this will remain like this, or if at one point we are saturated. It's not a big deal anymore if Coca-Cola publishes a very cool new advertising clip for games.
Oh, are we going there?
No. I don't know that kind of
that is a bit. That's
I just want to throw out some punches here and there, you know.
Yeah, I think like what you're saying is correct, and I think your hunch is also correct about the thing. Like, I think the people who are struggling to make esport like a full-time thing, is something they can spend their full time on and their passion to, or struggling to get the game, their scene going to even be competitive, they will always think and remember the brands who are there. But tomorrow's generation will take this for granted, and they will more look to how well is the integration. There was actually a panel from Kim Fan, who was a long-term senior esports manager at Blizzard for StarCraft, And she had this kind of message at a conference last week about like how you can take a streamer, for example, influencer, a player, whatever, and like, hey, say this message, please tweet this thing, and their fans are probably going to hate it. But if you just like be like, hey, you tailor your own voice, how we can fit in a more organic, harmonic fashion, then they can be way more accepted, I think, by the stream community, to even the future generation to be loyal to those brands.
I think there's definitely a horror cabinet of like bad integration examples. One of my favorites is like I think it's for, I don't know the brand, but it's for an alcohol-free beer, which already is a tough sell, to be honest, to any community, right? But you know, where they posted these quote cards of a player in a jersey holding this bottle, and it's essentially like, the blah 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 0.0% alcohol beer really helps me focus in my training, and it's nutritious and it's isotonic and it's a great drink. And I'm like, nobody talks like this. Don't do it like this. And that's why I mean earlier also with if you go into this space and you think now we're fine. If you don't do it authentic, right? You might as well just don't do it at all, because you will only do harm to the brand. You're the laughing stock of an entire community then, because this community, and that's what's also so cool about them, they see who is fake and see who is real, right? They see who's authentically in there and believes in the community and who's just in for a quick buck because some marketing agency said, yeah, you need to do this now for whatever reason, right? And this is where I think we will see a lot of division into who sticks around and who doesn't.
It's funny because the example you bring up is like textbook example of how you might do it in another industry, but as I've said, you need to tailor it carefully.
Yeah, but maybe these other industries can also learn from that, but it's not the good way.
I think also a misconception maybe some brands and even those just not familiar with esports will have is that they maybe see it as more as a male-dominated entertainment space, when in fact there is a larger a huge portion of the gaming and esports community is female, but perhaps especially in professional esports they're a little bit underrepresented. I think, Marie, you'd be best to explain to us like where we are right now in terms of building an esports industry that's perhaps a bit more open to female players and team members, and where does it have to go from there?
So we saw a lot of resistance back in the early 2000s when we were trying to create female tournaments. Mainly you had boys who were saying like, hey, these girls are only like top 10 in the male tournament, but here they get all these prizes, and there was quite a bit of jealousy. But it was not even close to the climate today, just because gaming has grown so much, and there's so much more people in the space. It's kind of become a vicious circle of supporting strong men in the space, actually. And so there's a lot of criticism happening on the women. Just last week we had Dagny, she works for ESL, who pointed out that, hey, the next PGL major, 30 talents, all male. And she got jumped on. And then, famous host Frankie got in there. She's like, well, I mean, we could just add one more. She got jumped on. So the amount of hate and resistance has become much more. And also, looking at what happened 2 weeks ago with Twitch actually leaking the top earnings, 3 out of top 100 streamers are women, right? And that's not a coincidence. That's just kind of the climate we live in. So it's a little bit harsher than ever. And the main problem is that there's no safe space anymore. We were creating one back in 2000, and we were getting, the girls were actually progressing a lot. In the beginning, they were coming there maybe a little bit shy with their hoodie. After 2 years, they had sponsors. We had teams flying in from Russia, from Spain. They had, full jerseys and everything, and the quality of play really increased. But then there's just been a few initiatives happening here and there. Female Legends are doing some stuff in Sweden regarding League of Legends. Radiant has been doing some Valorant tournaments, and ESL were trying for a while as well, but nothing that really has stuck to it. So that's kind of what I want to do now to improve that whole space. And if there's anyone who's interested in joining me in my mission, hit me up.
So
good luck.
To look in the very immediate future of esports, one thing that I think, the rest of the world is still reeling from is the COVID pandemic and the effect it's had. And I think when you look at gaming and esports, there's kind of this narrative that maybe the lockdowns, people being inside their homes, playing more games, watching more matches was necessarily a good thing. But it's perhaps a bit more nuanced than that. I mean, the fact is we've had very few live events in the last year and a half, and even less so with a live audience. If I can go through each of you, if you could talk about how the way COVID has affected esports has affected you and the way you conduct business in the space and the way you've been able to kind of reach your audience and customers?
For me, it's really straightforward. Like I've been in the video games industry making games, and it hasn't affected us at all. We had the best month ever in March 2020 when the pandemic hit, and we've been able to still work remotely, and it's been pretty intense, but we've been doing pretty well. So there's no complaints from my side.
So for us,
it's a bit of a different story.
No, but I got you. So no, like for the past year and a half, whenever I got approached by whoever, friends, colleagues, acquaintances, whatever, everybody always had this like pity undertone when they, hey, Dorian, how are you? All good with and like the counter that I always then bring is before, like in February 2020, before the pandemic struck, I think we were at VERITAS at level, we were 8 full-time employees. We are now 49, right? So we increased more than times 5 during the pandemic. And that is thanks to that we are not, despite what some always think when they take a look at level, we are not primarily a venue business, right? Obviously, if we would be a venue business, we probably would be dead by now, right? Or we wouldn't have expanded at all, would have been completely in hibernation mode, whatever, I don't know. But we're not. In the end, what is the business model behind a level is we bring in brands, we produce content for them, we offer authentic engagement with the target group through content, activations, etc. And these kind of things, they were more requested than ever, right? So, meaning we obviously couldn't do cool stuff with the audience on site, which sucked, right? And hurt us a lot going into this magnificent space every day and be like, empty, awesome, but we were able to produce content from there. We had a full in-house production crew, we still have, obviously. We produced some of the first Valorant tournaments there are, right? The Ignition series was in parts produced by us. We produced tournaments that we sold to Vodafone, to Red Bull. So we were really, really busy and were able to grow and obviously also show investors that our business model is multi-layered and brings in revenue despite a global pandemic that, where you would assume that, hey, they had built a venue, it must be total disaster for them. It wasn't. It obviously wasn't fun. It was for neither of us, right? I think, but it wasn't as bad as people think. Obviously, we are so looking forward that things are right now really looks like returning back to normal. Knock on wood, right? But overall, I can just say we've been very busy and we've been fine.
Nikola, from your point of view, was it a similar trajectory in that your business was kind of COVID-proof in a sense, or did you actually have to pivot and make changes to the model in order to kind of fit the new reality we found ourselves in?
So our original plan was to spread these types of B2B events where tech companies meet each other over CSGO across the world, basically. This is the type of event on top of which we received pretty large investment in the beginning of 2019 as a seed round. We've signed cooperation deals with the local provinces of Suzhou and Shanghai in China to bring this event to China. We plan to do an event in Berlin, amongst others, Hamburg, San Francisco, Dublin, and so on. And the first one was supposed to be in March 2020. So you can imagine what happened around March 2020, where we then had basically 2 months of reshuffling our cards. But as it turned out, COVID kind of provided companies with a need for a lot of digital content. This is where we stepped in, and we actually grew around 100% throughout the COVID year. So it was a huge setback to the original idea, but with a small shift in plans in accordance with esports, it kind of brought us new opportunities which we didn't count on originally.
If I could speak a little bit from Riot's perspective as well, those who follow the League of Legends European Championship, which we broadcast from in Berlin, will probably know that we haven't had a roadshow in the last year and a half. And in fact, it might sound kind of strange, but in the many years that the league's been running, it had never been online. It had always been in an offline environment. And then when the pandemic hit, we basically had to, we suspended the league initially, and then we had to move everything from the production to the players, all being online remotely. And now we're kind of working our way back up to the studio. Huge challenge, and one that I think our production team, our league management team, all kind of came to the forefront of and overcame. But I think for anyone, it's all about being able to pivot in the space and figure out like kind of where the value lies as well. That kind of brings me to the next point, which is like as we kind of start to enter a post-COVID world, do you think that where the value is in esports is going to change a bit? I personally believe that a live esports arena full of people is always the best experience possible, but it's not an experience that everyone can have. And one thing through the pandemic is we've seen the kind of more studio environments have really upped their game and have been delivering more content to people at home, maybe through stuff like co-streaming or reward drops for people who watch through different platforms. Where do you see the value changing both in physical esports spaces where fans present and then places where they're not?
I do believe, I think both things have value in this, and it will remain like this. I think now the first majors, and I'm currently evaluating if I go to the Blast finals and these kind of things, because I can't wait to finally cheer on Counter-Strike teams in an arena again. Obviously, it's all about the agility and that we tried out new things during the pandemic, and lots of these things will stick, right? Or showed that this is awesome, and hopefully we more people tuned in and got turned on into esports, because for also the majority of 2020, we got to take into account there was no real quote unquote but traditional sports on TV, right? Why ESPN then broadcasted Rocket League finals from 2 years ago or something like this, right? They did that. So maybe some people, got turned onto this, might very well be, and they might stick around. But generally speaking, I do believe, going forward, maybe we have now this whole new playing field of like remotely produced or digital and online tournaments. Obviously, you have to see how you monetize those, because obviously the major part of the physical events is also you sell T-shirts, you sell drinks on site, you get money out of the fan, right? It's tough to monetize a fan that's just watching online, but the production that needs to go into these kind of things, it is still somewhat similar also, right? If you want to, produce a kick-ass event, right, then you still have to have an entire, production behind it, and somebody has to pay for all of that, right? And the fan in a digital environment, it's tough to monetize him, right?
One thing we are seeing though, and this is something that happened in the video game, like the conferences for game developers, is that you're getting a little bit of the metaverse is starting to crawl up, right? Like I worked actually on Second Life 15 years ago, when that was a thing, and now I think there's rumors that Facebook is going to launch and even rebrand themselves to provide this metaverse. And so the idea there that a lot of people have is, what if you can go into, with your avatar into a virtual stadium environment and then sit there and cheer your team? I mean, it's something that is actually being talked about in a couple of different areas of the industry. So I'm curious to see what lies ahead.
And I totally love that, but I always think and that's major philosophy part going into level, right? That the physical and digital experience, if you meld them together, that's when the coolest shit happens, right? I do believe that some things, as cool as digital channels are, and as much as I'm a digital person, some things you can't completely emulate, despite even if the technology is really advanced, right? And that's why I love to see these. I love tuning into a virtual stadium with my avatar. I love that. I still think, and it's a nice option then potentially for people who don't have the means, can't travel, whatever, can't attend the event physically. Still, if I'm in the stadium, I do believe I will have the better time.
Absolutely. So I would say that the stadium experience, the offline experience, would be valued as a premium one, to be honest, in the coming years. Because, as you said, people maybe don't have the option to travel. It would be more difficult to attend the event than to watch it through digital channels. So it would be a premium experience to visit an offline event, and it will be available to a limited amount of people. I mean, pretty similar as it is now, but with the growing amount of fans for esports, no arena will be big enough to hold all the possible fans. So only the premium and lucky ones will be able to attend offline events. On the other hand, digital, meaning Twitch and YouTube streaming and whatever platform pops up, will be necessary. It's just mainstream for gaming and esports, and there's no event or competition which is now considered normal without having live stream through any given channel. And this type of channel branding and digital ownership of such an event will be just normal, just like drinking coffee. I think it will be followed through mobile phones and tablets and PCs, just on a regular scale and on a daily basis by basically everyone.
To pivot things a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about the talent acquisition side of esports. So even before the pandemic began, we saw very high-level executives from companies such as Netflix, sports leagues like the NFL, and other massive companies move into esports, without, even if they didn't have any prior experience in gaming. But whether we're talking about someone on the C-level or even just the entry level, what makes people actually want to work in esports as opposed to consume it? And especially since it is an industry of passion, like what are the positives that come from that, and maybe some of the challenges as well?
Boy, how much time do you have?
Some.
So, yeah, I can start then. Yeah, I'll start. Like, I think there's the two sides of it, so to say. Like, one is that, hey, anyone can be part and be a volunteer, whatever game you love. There's a community, there's a team, there's tournament organizers that are happy to, lend a hand, especially, if you're a student, you got a lot of time in your hands. You can jump in there, and eventually maybe you can grow that to a career, like the things that me and other people were doing back in the days, became DreamHack, became ESL, became Good Game, became these companies that are now actually hiring people to do this full time. So if you put enough time in there and grow your skills, maybe grow your channels, then you can actually get a job in esports today, which wasn't possible at the time. But number two is that the other side of the coin, and this is something I also experienced when I was working in TV, that even when you are semi-established, there will always be hungry, young students that are talent that come up and kind of undercut you and, fight for the job opportunities. And we had, especially one of the famous casts, I think it was Henry G from Counter-Strike, who said, that even if it's top-tier talents, been streaming and doing this for 15 years, they're getting kind of undercut because they get down-negotiated because of all these talented people coming in. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to kind of take the step up to the top.
So I've hired, and I've been present in pretty much all of these job interviews in that process because I don't take it lightly who I bring into the level cosmos, right? I think team is everything. So we hired more than 40 people over the last year. So you can imagine the amount of job interviews that I've had and the amount of applications and CVs that I've seen. And yes, there is a movement of people who come from other industries. And in some parts it's a good thing, because I do believe, especially when it comes to esports, not the overall gaming entertainment, that some of what they've done in other spaces, we can still professionalize esports quite a bit, On the other hand, we've also had more than one, case in at VERITAS and also in other companies that I know, where these people come in and they find something that they didn't think they would find, in the sense of, this is still very much startup, this is still very much Wild West, this is still very much, you have to have the passion for it, because with the passion that people like Maria, that I have, who started from the ground, that the volunteers still have, we're still part of this, this is something that makes you go the extra mile, right? And oftentimes, especially when it comes to building something in that ecosystem, you need to do that. Otherwise, you will fail, because the others have the passionate people then. And that's why when it comes to these, right now, for instance, we are looking for a head of sales and partnerships, right? Somebody who's commercial. And obviously, you don't just look into the esports industry. I actually look outside of the esports industry towards people who potentially marketed sports stuff. But they come into this knowing absolutely nothing about what we do. And then sometimes you have people who are able to educate themselves and are fast learners and are willing to literally sit down every evening, watch 2 hours of Twitch per night, right? Because this is what you need to do in order to understand and to sell the product. And and that's why I'm not sure. It's weird. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. I do believe many just follow through because they smell big paychecks, because some of the companies that have big VC investor money behind them, they just, big salary checks, even though it's not sustainable. Let's just,
it's a bubble.
Yeah, it's not sustainable, but they do this anyway. And sometimes, you have a return on that investment, and oftentimes I think you don't.
Yeah. It's funny, like, so I'm part of the league management team within Riot in Europe, and of course these are the guys, who are, overseeing the competitions, creating formats and rule sets and everything. And you would expect for that you need a very high degree of knowledge for the game, and for the most part that's absolutely true. But there's even some positions in our team which, if you have experience with, let's say, sports leagues or other forms of organized competition, it's extremely beneficial. Like, you can even drill out to the most core esports team or role, and there's always room for outside knowledge coming in. Yeah.
Absolutely. To me, it's sometimes, I think, a little bit more about expectation management. We've had these people who then come in and, like, in the job interview, the first thing they say if they come from a traditional sports environment and from a high level, first thing is I need my personal assistant. Like, and this is the mindset that approaches. And I'm like, I don't even have a personal assistant. I run this company, right? So, and that's why it's, it's sometimes weird. That's all it is. But I do believe, like, don't get me wrong, the outside knowledge out of other industries, I think it's absolutely beneficial. I think it's crucial for us to grow in the sense that it needs to grow to justify all that investment that goes now into this, right? You can't just build just with passionate people. Skills are very, very important. That's actually something that we learned over time, because when we first started, we made it our mantra that we only employ gamers, like hardcore gamers. First job interview question was like, what's your Steam ID? Let's check your library, right? And obviously for many positions, you absolutely don't need that. Like my finance director is a fantastic guy, right? Yeah. He doesn't play games. He doesn't need to. He can understand the business model, he can build it, he can be an awesome finance director. For everything that is then more related to content and where it's actually where you have to have the passion, then I think still that it is at worst just a little bonus, but at best also sometimes absolutely crucial that you have the passion for gaming, right? That you know what you're talking about.
I want to give just a quick shout out here also to Team Liquid, because they actually hired Claire Hungate, who comes from the traditional TV, as the CEO and president of Team Liquid. And she had a keynote at Esport Bar last week where she was like, okay, this is your industry. This is me seeing it from a perspective. And this is like how I see the parallels with TV and how things are happening. And this is what you guys should be doing, And I think everyone there was kind of taking notes, because she kind of brought that perspective and outside wisdom to kind of, everyone's like, oh yeah, we should do that. Oh yeah, we should own our own data. And, we should, of course, have direct access to our consumers, and we should align our messages with the brands. So it was like, yeah, I think outside people can really bring a lot.
I think it will be also especially important when these people come in to develop new revenue streams, right? Yeah. Because right now, how esports is mostly being monetized is through, here are brands, and they put on some form of integration, which is awesome. I love that, don't get me wrong. But the percentage of how much this makes up for the overall budget that we have or that esports generates, it's very different from what the sports industry does. So the sports industry makes way more money by selling merchandise to fans. It monetizes the fan overall better through tickets, all of this. And these are so many things, also then content-wise, right? I'm a huge NFL fan, so I buy the NFL Game Pass every year for 200 euros or something, right? Wow. But it's worth it to me because they keep it by the paywall. And I'm not saying that you can do this for gaming because we have Twitch, right? And it will be really tough to get away from this. Or you need to have really unique content that you might be able to put behind a paywall. But like just thinking about these things and like not just being focused on, we need to bring in more brands, integrate them in order to make revenue, will be a healthy thing to do, I believe, in order just to diversify our revenue streams.
Yeah.
If I can maybe chime in real quick, we've had experience with hiring a lot of people from different industries, and especially I'd say the sports industry is the closest one to esports, and them doing the business for, 100 years or however long professional sports was going on. I think they bring a lot of added value to the new industry of esports, and there's a lot of transferable knowledge and skills between the two. In addition to that, we mainly get two groups. Either a person is highly skilled and experienced, meaning some C-level or senior managerial status for, let's say, sales or marketing or whatever, or we get a fully hyped young person who has no idea about business but would give everything to work in gaming and esports. For the first type of person, for us, it was kind of important to bring them on, to learn from them, and for them to bring value to the team. But on more than one occasion, we will then be surprised that they are not actually that willing to adapt and to learn about the new industry. In our experience with the people that we've seen, more often than not, their thoughts are that their previous knowledge is good enough to actually create, sales and add value to the organization. On the other hand, the hyped kids, they would scale incredibly well with just a bit of mentoring and guidance in terms of proper business, sales, marketing, content, whatever is needed within the company currently. So I would more often opt in for the hyped kid, bring them on maybe as an intern or a junior, and then bring them up through a period of 6 to 12 months to a steady position. So these are the two kind of direct opposite which we have experience with, and then I'm always for the hyped gamer who is willing to learn. But of course there's hyped gamers who just want to do it because they love gaming, but they don't really want to learn about business. So you get both sides.
And sometimes you have the hyped gamer who is very skilled and has degrees and all of this, and those are the unicorns.
Yes.
Oh yeah, man. That's extremely valuable. If you know any and you don't want them, bring them my way, please.
No. Here starts the war of talents. Bring them to me.
I wish I could say I started out like that, but it was very much the opposite way. One thing that I would point out is that my entire professional esports career has been here in Berlin, right? And obviously the majority of the businesses we have here today are based here. The amount of all the people you've hired have to come live here and work here. Berlin is, in many essence, an esports city.
Yeah.
Although what that means is very up for the debate. Looking at it quite broadly, what would make a particular city or location somewhere attractive for the esports industry? What does it need to grow, bring in that talent, and actually build a kind of a sustainable business, even if that business obviously serves a worldwide market?
I think the coolest part about Berlin is and at one point it becomes this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, or gets its own momentum in the sense of every company is here, right? And with this, all the other companies tell, oh, they are all in Berlin. Maybe we should do something in Berlin too. So we have Twitch here, Epic Games here, Riot Games here. We have Level here, which is very important. We have all these gaming startups. We have so many. From startups to the big game publishers, they all at one point opened ever since Brexit and London fell off. They've all moved over to Berlin, and I think the amount of synergies that you can activate due to that, just sitting here with Marie, with you, in one room in Berlin, that's awesome, right? And I still don't think that in Berlin we do good enough of a job to activating all these synergies, because we could even do way more. And that's also a little bit what we want to do, which is why we host these things at Level, right, and bring people together as this one connecting point. And I think you can't enforce, a city to become a cool esports city, but you can take a look at Berlin as this kind of model. What do they have in terms of from production studios and one major league being played? Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it, right? Because due to that, all the teams have their stuff here, and then the game publishers follow, and all of a sudden you have this entire ecosystem being represented in the city. And if you can achieve that, but how many cities in the world can actually do that? I would say one per continent, maybe.
So I'm from Stockholm.
Also very good esports. Okay.
We were before Berlin, and I would say to have a wider perspective, you need mid-sized arenas that you can grow each new game in. You would need permanent arena like the GSL studio, for example, they have in Korea, that someone can actually rent an esports studio that is already kind of set up, and you don't need to put all this money into building it, so you can actually, the bar of entries is kind of low to do that. You need a big stadium, obviously. You need esports bars that you can go to afterwards, of course. Ideally, you have a state that gives money to grassroots esport organizations as well. And a couple of things that actually Sweden is doing. So the Swedish embassy here in Berlin is hosting a network event for the games industry to bring Swedish game developers to meet the German game developers, just to network. Awesome. Imagine if the Berlin state would do something like that. And the last thing, put esport on national TV, so that you show the parents and you grow the knowledge and acceptance in society. That's also something that if you want to be in an esport, not just city, but country, you need that.
Yeah, it's challenging because I think a lot of new cities that want to look at the esports space feel like, okay, we want to have like 50,000 people events, and this will be our ticket into it, which I would point out like that's not really the standard audience size for an esports event, but also having massive events is desirable, but it's not like the be-all, end-all of actually creating an esports city.
I actually would go so far again as to, like, and Nikola pointed out in his intro, right, that I think you have to widen your focus there a bit and not just focus on, is it an esports city, but is it a city for gaming, right? And these things go hand in hand. To be honest, I actually hate the distinction to a larger degree, because to me, in the end, the target group is for the most part the same, right? Esports is a part of the gaming industry. If you combine revenues, it's a significantly small amount of the revenue. It's 1 point something billion towards end of 2021, will 189 billion for the gaming industry, right? So it's like mini, but and that's why I believe like we have to widen the focus a bit. Like, it needs to become a good city for gaming, and this obviously plays a large into like game developers. Bringing startups on board, investing into tech, all these kind of things. And that's how you can build this awesome ecosystem, right? By not treating it too isolated, I would say.
But also in addition to this, I would say that like the position of city is very important for calling it an esports capital or a gaming capital, because Berlin is perfectly situated within Europe and it's very well connected to all the other hubs. So when you get, I don't know, a Pro Blast Series finals or something in the Mercedes-Benz Arena or wherever else, you can pop on a plane, fly over like just one leg and call it a day. You can get to an event basically in one afternoon. So I think that's also very important, that you can join people from the rest of Europe and not really depend only on the local environment and the local people, gamers, esports fans, and whatever. Maybe they have something else in plan. Maybe something else is happening in the city as well. So Berlin has this extremely good opportunity to drive visitors from all across Europe to attend events there. So I think that's very specific for Berlin. Nothing bad about Stockholm. I love Stockholm, but Berlin is more central, I would say, and closer to other locations.
It's fine. I still have this beef with Stockholm that they need to recognize esports athletes as sports athletes and give them visas promptu. They're still struggling. They're trying to do it now, but they've been struggling. They've been holding off it for a bit.
Well, Germany has a similar program where it does it recognizes esports players as sort of being culturally significant and therefore allows them a visa process. And I can say that's been very helpful. But it's a start, and I can say we still have a lot of trouble when it comes to visas and actually getting players into when we have international events, for example.
Absolutely.
Which raises sort of the big question then of, how can governments support esports? Like, forget the idea of creating an esports city, but just supporting the industry in general, whether it's from like a city level or a federal level. Should esports be considered part of like the wider net of sports, or should it be considered its own thing? Is it part of maybe the entertainment industry in general? It's a tricky question, but like, how can governments actually support esports on different fronts?
I mean, maybe I can jump in here real quick that the situation is, recently I was voted to be the vice president of the Esports Federation for Croatia, and we've gotten some ins with governing bodies, both of the city of Zagreb and the Republic of Croatia, and it's very tough getting in their ear for something as new as esports, where I think the forefront of everything to grow esports even more would be to create a grassroots environment where all the young talents have the ability to grow and to be nurtured and to actually see a future and, of course, profit in this new industry. Similar to football, where you have junior academies, I think esports should have an opportunity for its talents in a similar manner. And for this to happen, the government should be able to recognize esports athletes as athletes, proper athletes, to provide them with visas, let's say, and to provide the organizations with the status of a sports club, so they actually can get paid as athletes and not as employees of the company, which we currently have a problem now in the region. And most of CE countries have a similar problem. And on the other hand, tech companies, from my understanding, but please do correct me if I'm misreading this, are kind of tech companies, because you have really high-tech environments for production, for development of platforms, and for development of everything in regards to interactive environments of live streams, let's say. And other tech companies in countries get these subsidies, get the tax cuts and so on, but esports companies not so much. So they should also be recognized as tech. So there's a lot of things to be done on the government side to actually help speed up the development of esports.
We had this discussion a lot in Sweden as well. Like it's esports part of culture because traditionally it came in like we have like Sverok, so it's like the role playing, like the gaming culture role playing organization. They became an umbrella that then dispersed a little money down to different game organizations. That's how we got started. We got like contribution from the state that way. But looking at that little money bag compared to the big sports money bag, it's like a factor of I don't even know what. It's a big divide there, right? And so I agree with Nikola. Like I think it needs to be its own thing because if you go for it to be sports, then suddenly it's separated from game development and games in general, which is also not great. You know, if you go on culture, then you're not getting these sports visas. And then, like you say, like what tech also gets, like because I've been a program, I worked in tech. Like if you want to go to any country, you work in tech, you can get a work visa like that easily, really. So it needs to be its own thing, and it needs to kind of get the best of all the worlds to be able to really thrive.
Yeah. I'm a cynic, so I don't have a good answer to this question.
Okay. So I think that brings us into like one of the submitted questions we got, and it kind of ties in a little bit there in terms of like oversight of the industry to an extent. The first one is, and it's definitely a dicey question, but what is the impact of gambling on esports and the relatively young audience? I know that there's a bit of misconception in terms of like the relationship between the betting market and esports, and I can point out for a fact, for one thing, that in our competition rules, we have specific rules about teams, for example, using betting sponsors, which you might not see in other esports. But what's your kind of like different take on its place in the industry?
I'm very liberal when it comes to these things, and I hate the hypocrisy that we are seeing, especially in the German market, where, if I watch Bundesliga on Saturday afternoon, I'm being advertised at least 5 times to bet on the game that is up and coming now, on a sports game. But if in the evening then the ESL 1 is on and I want to bet money through Betway or whatever these companies are called, right, on an esports game, I can't at this point. It's not allowed anymore in Germany. It's illegal, actually, right? And that's where I think football still has lots of young viewers who are just as impressionable as gaming viewers, right? So from that end, like when it comes to actually betting on results like we do in traditional sports, I think it should be, as long as it's allowed in sports, it should be allowed in esports, right? Or ban both. Also fine for me because I'm not a big gambler, right? What worries me more is the impact of how game mechanisms of games are being used to make
attention.
Yeah, I mean there are lots of esports titles, sports simulations where you have to buy a lot of packs in order to draw the best players for your teams, in order to be able to compete, and that is something that I do believe. I mean, I'm a businessman myself in that sense, so I agree that it's nice to make money and monetize a fan. I just spoke about this, but if we want to talk about having a responsibility towards young people, I would rather look into that than look into somebody placing a $20 bet on whether Navi or G2 is winning that next round.
Well, I agree with you in practice. Like if you do it for sports, why not for esports, right? And back in the days, like Fragbite, one of the earliest like Counter-Strike pages in Sweden, they had a betting system where you could be like famous of the month, but you didn't get any money from it. But I participated. It was fun. It was interesting. But I think one of the problems is the match fixing has such a higher potential in esports because you're not making that much money as an esports athlete usually. Like we watch them as stars, but generally a few of them are. But generally most esports, the players are really not making that much money. So it might be more lucrative for them to do some match fixing. And we actually had one of the most famous StarCraft players of all time, StarCraft 2, Life. He actually got banned for match fixing a couple of years ago. So it's something to be a little bit wary about.
Yeah, it's an issue that will kind of keep being monitored as sort of the industry continues to grow and the player base and the esports player base rather continues to grow as well. I think we'll go for one last question before we finish up then, which is, do you see esports becoming a self-sustainable business model, which parts of the industry, and how long will VC companies keep on investing?
That's a good question. Whoever posted this in chat, kudos to you.
Yeah. That's very good. Do you want to just jump in on that then?
I think, do you see esports becoming a self-sustainable business model? It needs to be. It absolutely needs to be, and it will be. I do believe that, otherwise I wouldn't do what I do, right? Because, investors' money will only last for so long, right? I mean, it's also like whenever you're on LinkedIn or something and you see people celebrating their investment money, that's always something that has me worried a lot, because I oftentimes feel that people within our industry don't understand what that means, right? If you get 20 million in investment money or whatever, you have to pay that back at one point, and not just pay it back
with interest,
but quadruple it or whatever, right?
Within X amount of years.
So that is something that has me very worried, that some people who start business in that ecosystem treat this like monopoly money or something, just something that fell out of the sky and now I can spend it, and that's just not the reality of it. There are people behind it, and obviously this is what I said in an earlier stage of this conversation, that there is obviously the potential that there is a bubble always, and something, just pops, and there will be then always people who lose a lot of money, right? And this shouldn't scare people away from investing into this. You have to invest into the right things, because obviously it can be a sustainable business model. If we find new revenue, if we diversify a little bit how we make money with esports, if it's not just anymore the brands, but if we find new channels and ways of monetizing the fan, either through merchandise or through cool digital items or whatever it is, right? But we need to, in order to make this a sustainable business model, because otherwise the entire thing is pointless, right?
I think one thing here to look like I went to esports conference last week, and I met a lot of different players. It could be like someone doing product placement inside of esport games. It could be someone just putting together brands, matchmaking with different companies. It was a lot of tournament organizers, or someone who's like, we're just going to make a tournament layer where we're matchmaking game studios with small tournament organizer people. We have all these different players, right? And a couple of these are more established than others, I would say. So you have to kind of look at which one of these is the market actually ready for investing in, I would say.
If I can jump in really quick, we had I would say even luck that the company started with my own funds from back in the day from Google and Nanobit and so on. So I invested my own money to create the company and the brand, and we were reinvesting for the first 2 years carelessly. Every dime would go back into the company to hire more people, to develop tech, to buy equipment and so on. And we had to, because of our livelihoods, to be profitable actually from day one. So we never went outside of the boundaries of what we can afford. Only after 2 years of being profitable and steadily growing, we received an investment, which of course helped us grow even more. But as you mentioned, my fear is that a lot of esports companies are living on borrowed time from investor money, where it's very hyped for maybe a year or two, and then it just dies out and you never ever hear about them again, which is a huge problem, because then when communicating to VCs who are not misinformed people, they investigate the industry very well prior to investing. They see these cases and companies and names which then disappeared off the board, and they asked about the reason. But because we don't know the whole story, it's very hard to reason why the case of failed esports team or startup or whatever happened. I mean, on the other hand, it's a very volatile industry, as everyone knows, so it's kind of given that it's a very high risk, high reward investment. But I think the industry would benefit of people, and especially founders, getting more acquainted and educated about the prospects of investors, VCs, what it actually entails. As you said, it's actually borrowed money, which you have to bring back as a multiple, not just maybe like 1 or 2% as a bank would give you a loan. It's very difficult to do that. It's very difficult to scale as fast as VCs would like to, and it's also very enticing to get a few more zeros on your bank account just like that, and to brag about it for maybe a month or two. But then soon enough, reality sets in, stress piles on, there's no return, there's no new revenue streams. You figure out that you took on more than you can chew, and then basically just try to find a way out as soon as possible instead of focusing on growing the industry. And I think these cases are kind of bad-ish for the industry, and I would like to have more founders, better equipped to deal with the finance side of things.
Yeah. I think with that sobering advice, I think I'll draw the discussion to a close.
Yeah, I was just thinking we should actually end on a high note. I still love the industry.
Yeah.
It's so amazing to work in this.
The best industry ever.
You should pursue a career in this. It's amazing.
So much fun.
I want to give a shout out. I forgot earlier. You're talking about like what's happening in the female game space. First of all, there's a lot of female talent that is being featured. We got Seltzer, we got Smix, we got Freya, we got Pansy, we got
Shocks.
Yeah, Shocks. Like there's lots of them doing really good work. There's Frankie out there too, and everyone that I forgot, Miss Harvey as well. But also, actually, shout out to Riot as well, because they're now starting something they call Game Changers, where they're mentoring 10 women identifying, inside of the Valorant League to try to bring their skills up there.
It's one of the projects I'm definitely excited to see grow,
Yeah.
and I think it has a lot of potential.
Yeah.
So good to end on a more positive note on that
Yes.
sense. So I would say Marie, Dorian, Nikola, thanks so much for your time. Thanks for joining us. Really engaging discussion, really appreciate it. And also want to thank everyone at home. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for sending in your questions. Thanks again to MediaNet's partners for their support. Thanks to Third Nature Studios for having us today. And keep on keeping on. And
Yeah, if you want to follow, we got the Urban Chef over here. We got my Mejerwall is my handle. Dorian.
That's just my name, Dorian Gorr.
Dorian
You find me
Gorr.
on Twitter. Follow Level Global on all channels. Visit us here in Berlin for the best burgers and a good gaming experience. Nikola, when are you finally coming over? I expect you to be here now.
I'm there in a month. I'm coming over. I was at the center prior to it being opened, and I was promising some burgers, so I'm coming to collect.
Perfect. First burgers on me.
we're all promised some burgers. Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.